My name's Helen Collins. I'm 29, and I work at a small library in a town not many know about. My life is pretty simple, but I like it that way. I've always been quiet and liked books more than noisy stuff outside. The library is like my special place. It's old and a bit creaky, but I love it. Every day at 8 o'clock a.m., I open up, turn on the lights, and enjoy the smell of books. My parents passed away when I was young, so my grandma raised me. She taught me to love reading. But she's gone now, and I'm on my own. One morning, Mr. Jenkins, a regular, greeted me as usual. He loves history books. I told him we got a new shipment in. He chuckled and went to check them out. The day kept rolling like that, with familiar faces coming and going. I helped some kids with a project, suggested a romance book to Mrs. Harrison, and showed Mr. Thompson where the sci-fi books were. It's quiet, but I like it. Then, one day, everything changed when Jack showed up. He didn't seem like our usual library visitor. He was all dressed up and confident. He asked for The Great Gatsby. I led him to the classics section and handed him the book. Our hands touched briefly, and it felt like a small shock. But it stayed with me. "Thank you, Helen," he said, reading my name tag. "I'm Jack. Nice to meet you." That brief moment marked the start of everything. It was the beginning of a love story I thought would last forever, and the start of a journey that would take me from my quiet life into a world of chaos and betrayal. If only I'd known then what I know now, maybe things would be different. But life doesn't come with a warning label, and sometimes we just have to learn the hard way. After that first meeting, Jack started coming to the library more often. It was strange because he didn't seem like the type who read, but each time he came in, he'd ask for a book suggestion and chat with me for a bit. One day, he walked in as I was struggling with a box of new books. "Need a hand with that?" he offered, walking over. "That would be great, thanks," I said, relieved. As we placed the books on the shelves, he asked, "So, Helen, what got you into working at a library?" I shrugged. "I've always loved books. They're like friends, you know? Plus, it's nice and quiet here." He laughed. "I can see that. It's like a whole different world." Our conversations got longer with each visit. I found out he worked in his family's real estate business. He was easy to talk to, and for the first time in a while, I felt like someone was genuinely interested in me. Then one day, he surprised me. "Helen, would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" he asked, hopeful. I was taken aback. "Like a date?" "Yes, like a date," he smiled. I hesitated. This was new for me, but there was something about him that made me want to say yes. "Okay, sure. I'd like that," I replied, trying to sound steady. We went to a cozy restaurant in town. We talked about everything and nothing, and for a few hours, I forgot about my usual solitary life. Walking home, Jack said, "I had a really great time tonight, Helen. You're very different from the people I usually meet." I didn't know how to respond, so I just smiled. He continued, "I'd like to see you again. Would that be okay?" I nodded. "Yes, I'd like that." From then on, we started seeing each other more often. He'd take me out to dinner, or we'd go for walks. It felt nice. For once, I felt like I was part of something more, part of a world that wasn't just about books and quietness. It wasn't long before I fell hard for him. He was charming and attentive, and he made me feel special. And when he asked, I didn't hesitate. I said yes. Looking back, I wish I had seen the signs. I wish I had known that the charm was just a mask, a cover for something much less pleasant. Love can blind you, make you ignore warning signs, and I was head over heels in love, or so I thought. After Jack and I got engaged, things started to change. It began with his parents. They didn't like me from the start because I didn't come from money. The first time I met them, we were at their fancy house for dinner. I was nervous. "Helen, this is my mother Margaret and my father Richard," Jack introduced. "Nice to meet you," I said, trying to smile. Margaret looked me up and down. So you're the girl who works at the library?" "Yes, I am," I replied, feeling smaller by the second. Richard chimed in, "Jack, Couldn't you find someone more suitable? I felt like disappearing. The dinner was long and uncomfortable. They made it clear they didn't think I was good enough for their son. But Jack stood up for me, which made me love him even more. Before our wedding, they insisted on a prenuptial agreement. They said it was just a formality. I didn't have much to lose, so I agreed without making a fuss. After we got married, I moved into Jack's house, which was actually his parents' house. They had given it to him as a wedding gift, but they acted like it was still theirs. His parents came over all the time, unannounced. They'd walk in and start ordering me around. "Helen, make us some coffee." Margaret would demand as soon as she walked in, and I would, without saying anything. I didn't want to cause trouble. One day, Margaret pointed at the TV and said, "Remember, Helen, in case of divorce, you can't claim this." It was like that with everything. They constantly reminded me that everything in the house wasn't mine. Jack started changing too. He wasn't the man I fell in love with. He started joining in on the jokes his parents made about me. One evening, I was trying to decide what to wear for a family event. I asked Jack for his opinion. "This one makes you look less drab," he said, laughing. I was hurt. It was like he was a different person around his parents. He didn't stand up for me anymore. Instead, he laughed along with them. It was exhausting living in that house. I felt like an outsider, an unwanted guest. I kept hoping things would get better, but they only got worse. The stress got to me. I started having bad stomach pains. I tried to ignore them, but one day, I collapsed at the library. I woke up in the hospital, and the doctor said it was stress-related. I was in the hospital for a few days. Jack didn't visit. He didn't even call. I felt so alone. Then one day, a notary came to my room. He had news. My great-aunt, someone I barely remembered, had passed away, and she had left me her fortune, $30 million. I couldn't believe it. I didn't even know what to do with that kind of money. Suddenly, I wasn't just the poor girl from the library anymore. When Jack and his parents found out about my inheritance, they came to visit, suddenly all smiles and sweetness. "Darling, we're so happy for you," Margaret said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Yes, we're a family. We should support each other," Richard added. I didn't buy it. It was too much of a change. After they left, I overheard them talking outside my room. They didn't know I was listening. "She's such a fool. Can you believe our luck?" Jack laughed. "We need to make sure she doesn't leave you, Jack. Maybe you should have a child with her. That will tie her down," Margaret suggested. I felt sick to my stomach. These people didn't care about me. They just wanted my money. I knew then what I had to do. I had to get out of that house, away from these people. I had to take control of my life. I wasn't going to be their victim anymore. I left the hospital with a plan in my mind. As I got home, Jack and his parents were waiting. They were all smiles, acting like the caring family they never were. "Oh, Helen, we were so worried about you," Margaret exclaimed. I nodded but didn't say much. I needed to act normal, not to tip them off. Jack came closer. "So, when do you get the inheritance?" He asked a little too eagerly. I looked at him, the man I thought I loved, and realized I didn't even recognize him anymore. "Soon," I said, "but it's not something you need to worry about." His smile faltered a bit. "But we're married, Helen. What's yours is mine, right?" he pressed. I forced a smile. "Of course, darling." That night, I couldn't sleep. Their voices echoed in my head, their fake concern, their greed. It made me sick. I got up and started writing. I wrote down everything they had done, everything they had said. It was like a dam had broken, and years of pent-up frustration and pain poured out. The next morning, I had a meeting with a lawyer. I explained everything, showed him the prenuptial agreement. He was shocked, but he said the agreement would protect me. "You're doing the right thing," he assured me. When I got back, I found Jack and his parents in the living room. They looked up as I walked in. "There she is, our brave girl," Richard said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I sat down, clutching my purse. "I have something to say," I declared. They all looked at me curious. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice steady. The room went silent. Then Margaret erupted. What? You ungrateful little. Jack was on his feet. Helen, you can't be serious. We love you. Do you, Jack? Because I don't feel loved. I feel used, I replied. Margaret was fuming. We'll sue you. We'll take half of your inheritance. I reached into my purse and pulled out a copy of the prenuptial agreement. Actually, you can't. This says neither of us can claim the other's property in case of divorce. They were speechless. For the first time, I felt in control. I stood up. I'm leaving. I don't want any of you to contact me. I walked out of that house, their shouts and insults trailing behind me. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but as I drove away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was free. Free from their disdain, their manipulation. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew it had to be better than the past. I rented a small apartment in the city. It was nothing fancy, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. I was still dealing with the divorce, but I felt like I could handle it. One day, I got a call from the lawyer. Helen, there's something you should know about your great-aunt's will, he said. I was puzzled. What about it? There's a condition. You need to use a portion of your inheritance for a charitable cause. It was your great-aunt's final wish, he explained. I was surprised. I had no idea. She was quite the philanthropist. It seems she wanted to pass that on to you. I hung up the phone, deep in thought. My great-aunt had given me a chance to do something good. It felt like a sign, a push in a new direction. I started researching charities and causes. I wanted to do something meaningful, something that would make a difference. That's when I stumbled upon a small organization that helped women who were victims of domestic abuse. It struck a chord with me. I contacted them and set up a meeting. The women there were so grateful for the help. It felt like I was finally doing something worthwhile. I met Linda, who was passionate and dedicated. We provide shelter, legal aid, and counseling to women who have nowhere else to go, Linda explained. I listened, moved by the stories she shared. I want to help, I said, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. With Linda's guidance, I used a part of the inheritance to fund a new shelter. It was an incredible feeling, knowing I was helping other women find a way out, just like I had. A few weeks later, Linda invited me to the opening of the shelter. It was a small event, but the atmosphere was full of hope and gratitude. As people mingled, I noticed a familiar face in the crowd. Sarah, an old colleague from the library. Helen, is that you? She asked, surprised. Sarah, it's been so long, I said, hugging her. What are you doing here? She asked. I told her about the shelter, about my involvement. She listened, her eyes wide. That's incredible, Helen. I had no idea, she said. It's a new chapter for me, I said, smiling. We spent the evening catching up. It felt good to reconnect with an old friend. It felt like pieces of my life were slowly falling back into place. As the event wrapped up, Linda came over. Helen, I can't thank you enough. This shelter will change lives, she said. I looked around at the faces of the women who now had a safe place to go. It's the least I could do, I said, feeling a warmth in my heart that I hadn't felt in a very long time. The days started to blend into one another, each filled with the rewarding work at the shelter. I was finding a new sense of purpose, something that was truly mine. Then, out of the blue, my phone rang. It was a number I hadn't seen in a while. Jack. My heart raced with a mixture of emotions, but curiosity won. Hello, Jack, I said, my voice calm. Helen, I need to talk to you. Can we meet? It's urgent. His voice sounded desperate. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet him at a public coffee shop, hoping that being in a familiar place would give me strength. Sitting across from Jack, he looked different, defeated, almost pitiful. His eyes were pleading. Helen, I made a huge mistake. I want you back. I've realized how much you mean to me, he blurted out. I looked at him, feeling nothing but contempt. Why now, Jack? He sighed. My parents, they controlled everything. They were the reason our marriage failed. I was weak, but I'm different now. I felt a surge of anger. You blame your parents. You stood by while they treated me like dirt. He laughed with them, Jack. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Please, Helen. I know I was wrong. I've changed, he pleaded. I stared at him, seeing the man I once loved. But now I felt nothing for him. Changed or not, it's too late. I feel nothing for you, Jack. Nothing but contempt, I said firmly. His face fell, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the man I married, but it was fleeting. I'm sorry, Jack. I've moved on. I have a life now, a purpose. There's no place for you in it, I said firmly. He nodded slowly, a look of resignation on his face. I understand. I just had to try. Leaving the coffee shop, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. Truly over. The next day, there was an event at the shelter. A local artist had donated a sculpture, and it was to be unveiled in the garden. As I stood there surrounded by people who supported and believed in me, I felt a sense of belonging. Sarah, my old colleague from the library, stood beside me. You've done something amazing here, Helen, she said, smiling. The artist pulled the cover off the sculpture, the figure of a woman reaching up to the sky. It symbolized hope, strength, and new beginnings. Applause filled the air, and for a moment, everything felt right in the world. Linda, the woman who had helped me so much, came over. Helen, this is just the beginning. There's so much more we can do, she said. I looked around at the faces filled with hope and knew she was right. This was my new beginning, and I was ready to embrace it fully. My new life was busy and fulfilling. Every day at the shelter brought new challenges and rewards. My confidence grew, and for the first time in years, I felt in control of my destiny. I even started taking self-defense classes, something I would have never imagined doing before. One day, as I was leaving the shelter, I saw a car parked outside. It was my mother-in-law, Margaret, and she stepped out as soon as she saw me. Helen, we need to talk, she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard. I have nothing to say to you, Margaret, I replied, my voice steady. Please, just hear me out. I've realized how wrong we were, she pleaded. I stopped and looked at her. She seemed genuine, but I couldn't forget the past. What do you want, Margaret? I want to apologize. I treated you terribly. I have lost my son because of it, and I don't want to lose you too. You were like the daughter I never had, she said, her eyes glistening with tears. I felt a pang of something. Sympathy, perhaps. Margaret, you made my life a living hell. An apology won't change that. I've moved on, and I suggest you do the same, I said firmly. She reached out to me, but I stepped back. Please, Helen, I know I can't undo the past, but I want to make things right, she pleaded. I shook my head. It's too late for that. Goodbye, Margaret. As I walked away, I felt her gaze on my back, but I didn't look back. I had learned to stand up for myself, and there was no going back to the way things were. The next day, I received a letter from Jack's lawyer. He was contesting the divorce settlement. I wasn't surprised, but I was ready. I met with my lawyer, a sharp woman named Rachel. He's got no leg to stand on, Helen. The prenuptial agreement is clear. He's just trying to intimidate you, she said confidently. I nodded. I'm not afraid of him anymore. Let's fight this. The court date arrived, and I walked in with my head held high. Jack was there with his lawyer, and for a moment, our eyes met. There was a flash of the old Jack, the one I had loved, but it vanished quickly. The judge listened to both sides, and then made her decision. The prenuptial agreement stood, and Jack's claims were dismissed. I felt a surge of relief and triumph. After the court session, Jack approached me. Helen, I'm sorry. I was wrong, he said, his voice low. I looked at him, seeing the man I once loved, but now felt nothing for. Goodbye, Jack. Take care of yourself, I said, and walked away. As I left the courtroom, I felt a sense of closure. That chapter of my life was finally over, and the new one was just beginning. At the shelter, we were planning a fundraiser, and it was taking all my attention. The support from the community was overwhelming, and I felt a deep sense of gratitude. The night of the fundraiser arrived, and the place was buzzing with energy. People from all walks of life had come to support our cause. As I looked around, I realized how far I had come from a quiet, timid woman to someone who stood up for herself and others. Helen, you did it. This is amazing, Sarah said, coming up to me. I smiled. We did it. And there's so much more to do. As the event went on, I felt a sense of accomplishment and purpose. This was my life now, and I was exactly where I was meant to be.
Hey everyone, I'm Jane, just your average 27-year-old. Life took a surprising turn for me a few years ago. This is my story, straightforward and real. It all began when I changed jobs and became an accountant at a new company. That's where I met Mark. He was the sales guy, confident, charming, with a smile that could sell anything. Our first encounter was in the break room over the office's finicky coffee machine. "Hey, you're the new accountant, right?" Mark said, leaning casually against the door frame with a smirk. "Guilty as charged. I'm Jane." "And you are?" I replied, trying to act cool but secretly curious. "I'm Mark, head of sales and the unofficial coffee machine expert," he said with a wink. We both laughed, and from that moment, we hit it off. Fast forward 2 years, and Mark planned the most romantic proposal. A weekend getaway to the beach, dinner at sunset, and then he got down on one knee. It was like a scene from a movie. I said yes without hesitation. Our wedding was simply beautiful and filled with love. Time flew by quickly after our wedding. We began our married life in my grandpa's old house, a charming place full of history that I've always adored. A few weeks into settling down, Mark brought up a big idea. "Babe, have you ever considered taking a break from work? You know, being a housewife for a while?" Mark suggested one evening, his eyes hopeful. I was surprised. A housewife? "But Mark, I've always been passionate about my career," I replied, trying to hide my confusion. "I understand, Jane, but work has been going well for me. We can afford it. Imagine no more stress, just focusing on us, maybe starting a family soon," he said, reaching for my hand. His words were convincing, and I couldn't help but be swayed by his enthusiasm. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. Why not shake things up a bit, right? The first few weeks were exciting. I finally had time for gardening, reading, and trying new recipes. Mark would come home to a clean house and dinner on the table. We spent our evenings making plans and laughing. It felt like an extended honeymoon phase. But as time passed, I began to feel restless. I missed the challenges of my job and the satisfaction of solving complex problems. I even missed the annoying buzz of my office phone. Still, I brushed those feelings aside, telling myself it was just an adjustment period. Then things started to change subtly. Mark's compliments about the house or dinner turned into expectations. If dinner was late or the house wasn't perfectly tidy, he'd make comments that hurt more than I wanted to admit. I felt less like a partner and more like a live-in maid. I called my best friend Laura to talk about it. "I feel like I'm losing a bit of myself, you know?" I confided in her. "You're a firecracker, Jane. Don't let this housewife gig douse your spark," Laura encouraged, her voice a mix of concern and support. Laura had a good point. I've always prided myself on being independent, making my own way. Now, I felt lost in a role I never imagined playing. After settling into this housewife routine, I thought I had everything figured out, but I was mistaken. One evening, Mark dropped a bombshell that turned everything upside down. He came home looking serious, which was unusual. "Jane, we need to talk," he began, not even taking off his coat. "What's up? You look like you've seen a ghost," I joked, trying to lighten the mood. "It's my folks. Their apartment is getting renovated, and they need a place to crash for a couple of weeks," Mark said, avoiding eye contact. "A couple of weeks here, but—" "Yeah, it's just for a short while. It won't be that bad," he assured me. I sighed reluctantly. "Okay, but they need to respect our space, Mark." "Of course they will. Thanks, babe. You're the best." Fast forward a few days and Mark's parents, Bob and Linda, arrived. It was chaos. Bags, boxes, even furniture. They brought everything but the kitchen sink. "Jane, dear, make room. We've got a lot of stuff," Linda said, barging in with a box that seemed to contain her entire life. Bob followed, struggling with a huge armchair. "Hope you don't mind us bringing some comforts from home," he grunted as he squeezed it through the door. Our cozy home turned into a storage unit overnight. Everywhere I looked, there were their belongings. It was overwhelming to say the least. But that was just the beginning. Bob and Linda wasted no time settling in. Bob took over the TV, flipping channels like he owned the place. Linda started rearranging my kitchen. Linda, what are you doing? I asked, trying to stay calm. Oh, just organizing things a bit better, dear. You know how it is, she replied without even looking at me. I bit my tongue, reminding myself it was temporary. But inside, I was furious. This was my home, and they were treating it like their vacation house. Then came the dinner disaster. I made a healthy salad and grilled chicken, my usual fare, but Linda looked at her plate like I'd served her grass. What's this rabbit food? She scoffed, pushing the plate away. Mom, come on. Jane worked hard on this. Mark tried to intervene. It's fine, Mark. I can make something else, I said, though it was far from fine. No, let's order pizza. I need some real food. Bob chimed in, already reaching for his phone. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider in my own home. Mark snored beside me, unaware of the turmoil inside me. I was doing all the hosting, cooking, and cleaning, only to be treated like an unpaid maid in my own house. My in-laws, Bob and Linda, had turned my house into their personal playground. Linda started taking over the kitchen like she was running a military operation. One morning, as I made my usual avocado toast, she marched in and made a face. What are you eating, bird food? She snorted, rummaging through the fridge. It's avocado toast, Linda. It's healthy, I replied, trying to stay calm. Healthy Shmioff. You need some real food, girl. Here, let me make you some eggs and bacon, she said, pushing me aside. I stood there fuming as she took over my breakfast. It was clear she didn't respect my choices or my space. Then there was Bob. He had turned our living room into his personal lounge. One evening, I wanted to watch my favorite show, but Bob was sprawled on the couch, watching some loud action movie. Bob, do you mind if I watch my show? It's the season finale tonight, I asked, holding the remote. No can do, Jane. I'm watching this. Find something else to do, he replied without even looking my way. I couldn't believe it, feeling like a stranger in my own living room. I stormed off. But the real kicker came a few days later. I found Linda rearranging my closet. Linda, that's my personal stuff, I yelled, losing my temper. Oh, relax, Jane. I'm just making some space for our things. You've got too much junk here anyway, she said, tossing my clothes aside. That's when Mark walked in. What's all the yelling about? He asked. Your mother is going through my things, that's what's wrong, I snapped. Mom, maybe you should ask Jane before moving her stuff, Mark said, but his tone was half-hearted. Fine. I was just trying to help, Linda huffed, leaving the room. Mark turned to me. Jane, can't you just let it go? They're just trying to fit in. They're taking over, Mark. This is our home, not theirs. I said, my voice rising. Mark sighed. Just bear with it a bit longer, okay? I felt so alone in that moment. My home didn't feel like mine anymore, and it seemed like Mark was more on their side than mine. The situation in my house was already pretty tense, but what happened next really pushed me over the edge. One day, I noticed my bank card was missing. Panic mode kicked in. I tore the house apart looking for it, only to find it in the most unexpected place. Linda's purse. I confronted her immediately. Linda, why do you have my bank card? She just shrugged. Oh, I needed to pick up a few things and didn't have cash on me. I didn't think it would be a big deal. A big deal? You took my card without asking. That's stealing. I was fuming. Before I could say another word, Mark walked in. What's all this shouting about? He asked, looking at me then to his mother. Your mom took my bank card and used it without my permission, I explained, holding up the card. He turned to Linda. Mom, you should have asked first. Linda rolled her eyes. I just needed a few groceries. It's not like I bought a diamond necklace. I couldn't believe my ears. It's my money, Linda. You can't just take my things. That's when Mark dropped a bombshell. Jane, let's not blow this out of proportion. You live off my money anyway. So what's the big deal if my mom uses it? I was speechless. His words hit me like a slap in the face. Your money. I can't believe you're saying this. It's our money, Mark, and our marriage. He just shrugged. Whatever. It's not a big deal. She'll pay you back. I felt like I was in some bad dream. My husband was taking his mother's side over something so serious. A couple of weeks passed and the tension in the house became unbearable. I decided it was time to ask the big question. So when are you two planning to move back to your apartment? I asked Bob and Linda one evening at dinner. They just laughed. Move back? Why would we do that? Linda said, exchanging a look with Mark. Yeah, we've decided to stay here. It's much nicer, and Mark doesn't want to waste money on rent for us, Bob added. I turned to Mark, looking for some sort of explanation. He avoided my eyes. Yeah, Jane, it doesn't make sense to rent a place for them when we have space here, he said. I sat there stunned. My home, my sanctuary, was being overtaken. My husband, whom I thought was my partner, was now telling me his parents were here to stay. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, they did. One day, I decided to go for a jog to clear my head, but luck wasn't on my side. I tripped and fell, and the pain was instant. I knew I had broken my leg. Hobbling back home was a nightmare. When I got back, I found Mark and his parents in the living room. Mark, I think I broke my leg. I need to go to the hospital, I said, trying to keep the pain out of my voice. Mark looked up, annoyed. What now, Jane? Can't you see we're busy here? Linda chimed in. Oh, stop being dramatic. It's probably just a sprain. No, it really hurts. I need help, I insisted, feeling the room spin from the pain. Bob scoffed. At your age, you shouldn't be running around like a teenager. Serves you right. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'm in pain here. Can't any of you see that? Mark finally got up, his expression more of inconvenience and concern. Fine, I'll take you, but this better not be some ploy to get out of housework. At the hospital, it was confirmed, a broken leg. The next few weeks were hell. I was stuck at home on crutches, unable to do much. You'd think my husband and his parents would help, right? Wrong. They acted as if nothing had changed. I was still expected to cook and clean. One day, I was trying to make lunch, balancing on my crutches. Linda walked in and saw me struggling. Can't you do that any faster? We're hungry, she said, not offering to help. I'm doing the best I can on one leg, I snapped, my frustration boiling over. Well, it's not good enough. You're being incredibly lazy, Linda retorted. That's when Mark walked in. What's going on here? He asked, looking at me then to his mother. Your wife is taking forever to make lunch. It's like she's using her injury as an excuse, Linda complained. Mark sighed. Jane, can't you just try a bit harder? We're all hungry here. I was in disbelief. Try harder. I'm on crutches, Mark. What do you expect me to do? He just shrugged and left the kitchen with his mom, leaving me there, seething and in pain. You won't believe what happened next in my in-law nightmare. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, it did. A few weeks after my injury, Linda and Bob announced they were hosting Thanksgiving at our house and inviting their relatives over. The news hit me like a ton of bricks. Thanksgiving, at our house. I asked incredulously, how am I supposed to manage that with my leg like this? Linda just waved her hand dismissively. Oh, you won't have to do much. Just stay out of the way and let us handle it, she said. I was fuming. This is my house, Linda. You can't just invite people over without asking me. That's when Mark stepped in. Jane, it's just a family gathering. Let's not make a big deal out of it. A big deal, Mark? I can barely walk, and now your parents are taking over our house for a party, I said, my voice rising. Bob chimed in. We thought it would be nice to have a family gathering here. After all, we're all living under the same roof now. And then Linda dropped another bombshell. Actually, Jane, we were thinking it might be best if you stayed somewhere else for a couple of weeks with your leg and all. You'll just be in the way. I stared at her, completely dumbfounded. Stay somewhere else in my own house. Yes, dear, just for a couple of weeks. It's for the best, Linda continued, as if she was doing me a favor. I felt my blood boiling. You want me to leave my house so you can play host? That's insane. Mark chimed in, trying to sound reasonable. Jane, it's just for a short while. It'll be easier for everyone. Easier for everyone? This is my home, Mark. I'm not going anywhere. I shot back, my voice shaking with anger. Bob shrugged. We thought you'd appreciate not having to deal with the stress of the holiday. That was it. I lost it. Get out, both of you. Get out of my house now. I yelled, feeling a mix of rage and disbelief. Mark's face turned red. Jane, you're being unreasonable. They're my parents. You can't just kick them out. Unreasonable? They're taking over my home, and you're letting them. I practically screamed. Mark's expression hardened. If you can't respect my parents, maybe we shouldn't be together. Is that what you want? A divorce? I glared at him, feeling a rush of adrenaline. Without a word, I went to my desk drawer and pulled out a set of papers I had prepared just in case things went south. What's this? Mark asked, his voice faltering as he took the papers from my hand. Divorce papers. I've had them ready for a while now, I said, my voice steady. Mark looked at me, then at the papers, and back at me. You're serious? You'd really go through with this? Yes, I am. I won't be bullied in my own house. Not by you, not by anyone, I said, feeling a strange sense of empowerment amidst the chaos. Linda and Bob just stood there speechless. Mark looked like he had been punched in the gut. The room was thick with tension. Make your choice, Mark. Your parents or our marriage, I said, holding my ground. Mark laughed, a cold, hard sound that sent shivers down my spine. Fine, he said, and to my shock, he signed the papers right there and then. You'll regret this, Jane. You can't even support yourself without me, he said. I watched him, feeling a mix of relief and disbelief. I'll manage, I said, though my voice was barely a whisper. He shrugged. You're lost then. He and his parents gathered their things and left just like that. My marriage was over. The moment the door closed behind them, I felt a strange sense of peace. I was alone, yes, but it was a better alternative to the constant tension and disrespect. The first thing I did was change the locks. It felt like I was securing my own personal fortress. Thanksgiving came around faster than I expected. I was still adjusting to my new reality, finding comfort in the quiet of my own company. Then, unexpectedly, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Mark, his parents, and a bunch of their relatives standing there, ready to celebrate. What are you doing here? I asked, stunned. We're here for Thanksgiving, Jane. Did you think we were serious about not coming? Mark said with a smug look. I couldn't believe the audacity. You're not welcome here anymore. Mark, this is my house, and you're not my family, not after what you did. Linda piped up, oh, come on, Jane. Don't be so petty. Let's just have a nice dinner. I stood my ground. No, you need to leave now. Mark laughed. You can't kick us out. This was our family home. Not anymore. I changed the locks. Mark, you gave up any right to this house when you signed those papers, I said, feeling a surge of empowerment. There was a moment of silence, then Mark's face turned red with anger. Fine, have it your way, he said, and they all turned and left. After the Thanksgiving showdown, I started to rebuild my life. And let me tell you, it wasn't easy. But it was mine. A few weeks after Mark and his family left for good, I was sitting in my quiet, peaceful living room when my best friend Laura dropped by. Hey Jane, how are you holding up? Laura asked as she walked in, her eyes scanning the room. Better than I expected, actually, I replied, offering her a smile. Laura sat down, looking at me closely. You seem different, stronger somehow. I chuckled. Yeah, I guess getting rid of dead weight does that to you. We both laughed, and in that moment, I felt lighter than I had in months. But seriously, what's next for you, Jane? Laura asked, her tone shifting to something more serious. I took a deep breath. I'm going back to work. I've already started looking for accounting jobs. I'm not going to lie, it's a bit scary, but it's time to get back on my feet. Laura nodded. That's the spirit. You were always the smartest one at the office. They'll be lucky to have you back. Her words meant a lot and gave me the boost I needed. I was ready to face the world again on my own terms. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of job interviews and getting my life back on track. I landed a great position at a local firm, and for the first time in a long while, I was excited about the future. My home was mine again. My life was mine again. I had faced the worst and come out stronger.